When Qatar won the right to host this World Cup, it made a promise.
We will make sure that this is a milestone in the history of the Middle East and a milestone for FIFA.
But questions remain about this tiny Gulf state being the host. Questions about human rights, the environment, and how FIFA reached this moment.
Qatar!
That choice was made by FIFA's executive committee. But even before the vote, there were issues. 2 members were suspended over allegations they'd offered to sell their votes. Since the decision, a whistleblower has alleged 3 members were offered cash for votes by Qatar. And US prosecutors have alleged that 2 more FIFA officials were offered and received bribe payments to vote for Qatar. The FIFA officials involved and Qatar have always denied the allegations. And a FIFA inquiry concluded votes weren't sold. But it also found potentially problematic conduct of specific individuals as part of Qatar's bid. What we can be sure of is that most of the committee that took this decision have since been accused, banned, or indicted over allegations of corruption or wrongdoing. And once the decision was made, vast construction projects began. Transport, hotels, and stadiums. 7 new ones were built. Hundreds of thousands of foreign workers, mostly from South Asia, were hired. And there have long been concerns about their treatment.
Workers were exposed to a whole range of different forms of exploitation, including having their passports confiscated, living in squalid accommodation, and in some cases it amounted to forced labour.
Qatar, though, has told the BBC it's improved conditions.
The work that has been done by the government in terms of labour reform, what the World Cup did was it accelerated that initiative. It was a catalyst for that change.
There have been reforms. Human Rights Watch calls them significant, but it also highlights ongoing wage abuse and exorbitant recruitment fees. There are also widely shared claims that thousands of workers died building this World Cup. That's not supported by available evidence, though establishing the number of deaths is hard. Qatar says there have been 3 work-related deaths on World Cup sites. The UN's International Labour Organization says that is an underestimate. It also says there were 50 work-related deaths in 2020 in Qatar as a whole, and that most of them were migrant construction workers. But the ILO acknowledges the limits to this data. It's called on Qatar to improve how it records deaths, in particular related to heat stroke. There's also the environmental impact of this World Cup.
The Qatar World Cup has set a real example in sustainability and what can be achieved. I've never seen anything like this before.
Certainly we've never seen a World Cup with a carbon footprint like this before. Those stadiums, hotels, a new metro system, 1 million people flying in, it all comes at a cost. This is FIFA's emissions estimate for the last World Cup in Russia. Its estimate for Qatar is higher. But one UK university says it's likely to be much higher than that. Despite this, Qatar is making this claim.
Examples of the work we are doing include organising a fully carbon-neutral World Cup.
That's based on offsetting emissions, and this leading climate scientist isn't convinced.
The idea that they've somehow made it green by cheap, nasty so-called offsets that just don't undo the damage from the emissions at all, to become carbon neutral, that doesn't stack up at all.
There's one more issue too, LGBT rights. This is the message to fans.
We welcome everybody, but also we expect and we want people to respect our culture.
And there's concern about what that means, because homosexuality is illegal in Qatar. This month, the Qatari World Cup ambassador described homosexuality as damage in the mind. According to Human Rights Watch, this year, LGBT people have been arrested and beaten. And as we consider all of these concerns, let's remember where the last World Cup was. Russia, after Vladimir Putin had already annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Big sports events often come with political and cultural tensions and compromises. As well as that, as the former FIFA boss Sepp Blatter said about the decision to choose Qatar, of course, it was also about money. And that's something Qatar has a lot of. This is how much was spent on each World Cup since 1990. This is what Qatar has spent. And after that kind of investment, This is FIFA's message.
Everything is ready and everyone is welcome.
In a letter to teams, Gianni Infantino has written, "We know football does not live in a vacuum," but he urged, please, let's now focus on the football. It's now for fans and players to decide to what extent they're willing to do so.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mutiara. My student ID number is 1202622035. I will present the final project for listening for general communication. I have analyzed a news. So the title for this news is How Qatar Got to Host the World Cup. This news is produced and broadcast by the BBC News channel. The intended audience is everyone, but its focuses on people who like football and are looking forward to the World Cup. For the setting, the setting of this news is on the TV station and the places of resource person. There are several figures in this news. The first one is the news anchor, and then there are some interviewee or source person. There are Mohammed bin Hamad Al Thani, the chairman from Qatar 2022 bid committee, and then James Ling from Amnesty International, and then David Beckham, he was a football player. And then Professor Mike Wennersley from Manchester University, and then Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Emir of Qatar. And then the last one, Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president. The social purpose of this news is to inform the viewers about a particular event. The event in this video is Qatar is the host of World Cups 2022, and to inform, it's also inform about some issues or controversial about it. As I mentioned before, there are some issues or controversial. The first one is about fraud selling. To host the World Cup, a vote was previously held to select one of the countries that qualified for the tournament. But even before the vote, there were issues. 2 members were suspended over allegation they offered to sell their votes. Since the decision, a whistleblower has alleged 3 members were offered cash for vote by Qatar, and US prosecutors have alleged that 2 more FIFA officials were offered and received right payment to vote for Qatar. The second one is labor exploitation and ill treatment of workers. When the decision the Qatar to be the host of the World Cup, fast construction projects began, and hundreds of thousands of foreign workers, mostly from South Asia, were hired, raising concerns about their treatment. There are claims that thousands of workers died while building the World Cup. The third issue is the environmental impact. Because of construction and a million passengers flying in, there's an assumption that emissions in Qatar are very high. There is FIFA emission estimates for the last World Cup in Russia, as you can see in the slide. Estimates for Qatar are higher, and one of UK universities says the odds are much higher than that. And the last one is issue about LGBT rights. There were the message to fans from Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. He said, "We welcome everyone, but we also expect and want people to respect our culture." So there is concern about what that means because homosexual is illegal in Qatar. Then for language features, using simple past tense, using present perfect tense, using simple present tense. You can see the examples for the tenses. And then using simple present continuous tense, using saying verb, using passive voice, and using active voice. There are also the examples for the sentences. And then the conclusion of news is, when Qatar won the right to host this World Cup, it made a good promise. We will make sure that this is a milestone in the history of the Middle East and a milestone for FIFA. But there are several issues and controversial involve human rights, the environment, and how FIFA reached this moment, such as fraud selling, labor exploitation, ill treatment of workers. There are also widely shared claims that thousands of workers died building this World Cup. There's also an assumption that the impact of the environment was also bad, and LGBT people are not allowed there. Gianni, the president of FIFA, argued. He said, "Please, let's now focus on the football." That's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.